here, the purpose for this filming
Can you edit this out?
is
on my part?
to try to leave something that tells the story of how NASU got started. And so we attended the alumni dinner last night. We heard the president of the university speak and a few other of the officials of the administration, and it inspired me to think about ways to talk about what happened here 30 some odd years ago. I guess I would begin by saying that the context is important. The historical context is important because this was happening all over the United States. It wasn't just here. University of Oregon was just one place where minorities were suddenly trying to gain access to a university experience. There had been two earlier revolutions in American higher education. The most recent before that was the one caused by the GI Bill after World War II. It increased the number of students in American universities by about 2.5 million overnight, and the number of high school attendees by about 8 million. So you had a huge utilization of that resource for educational purposes. People who now had access to a university who never would have had access. Well, then we had the death of President Kennedy, and we had the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and the Vietnam conflict. Public discontent was on the rise about the war. Minorities were beginning to feel their strength. Certainly, the Civil Rights Act itself became important. Martin Luther King was, everybody knew who Martin Luther King was. His assassination, the assassination of both of the Kennedy brothers. Suddenly, we were in a nation of turmoil and unrest. And the University of Oregon felt it no less than the University of Michigan, Kent State. Certainly, they felt it. Four students killed in a standoff between National Guard up there and students. Berkeley was probably the initial part of it. For Indian people, it really did begin at Berkeley with a guy named Lehman Brightman. And Lehman Brightman was an Indian guy running around the country giving speeches, inflammatory speeches about the Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and it was exciting Indians all over the United States. And minority people weren't stupid. Indian people weren't stupid. They knew that a university education really meant something. It meant something in very real economic terms for their tribes, for their families, and so on. So there was this wave of minorities coming at universities from all over the United States. And we felt it here. George's older brother, Wilford, was a student here, and he really started the Native American Student Union. By the late 1960s, it had matured into a pretty active club. George, in the meantime, had gotten a job here with Student Services and became a gateway for many Native people in Oregon and outside of Oregon to get into this institution. And he had managed to make communication with a number of faculty who were also sympathetic to the idea of getting minorities and particularly Native Americans into a college and university setting. Notable among them would be, probably the top of that list would be Barry Tolkien, I guess.
One of the top.
Yeah. Ed Coleman worked also in the English department. Ed Ebbinghausen and the astronomer. Peter von Hippel in physics, who was a physicist, brought a young Navajo man, Ticina Scott, in as a student, and so he was interested in getting Indians into science. So we had a number of allies in the faculty itself that were beginning to see the possibilities for getting Indians going here. But what it was to start with was a kind of a voluntary club. It didn't have any resources beyond what they could give themselves. There was no outside money. There was the student union. There was Herb Memorial Union, and those Herb gave office space to those clubs downstairs in that building. The first one to be active was the Project 75, which was the sort of a university club for black students. And of course, this was when the Black Panthers were marching on the streets of Eugene on Saturday mornings, scaring the hell out of people. And so, you know, I guess what I would say about that time was that it was not necessarily it was not a sanguine, it was not a peaceful time. It was a conflict. It was almost a hostile conflict between the aspirations of the people coming, the minorities that were coming, and the university, which on the one hand was trying to open itself up, but on the other hand was scared to death about what it meant. And so you had in the university itself an ambivalence about, you know, did they really want, and how far were they willing to go to open the doors up for these new people. And so we were going to test that out over the next 5 or 6 years. That was going to be tested out, and I'm afraid that the verdict of that test might not be what we think it was. It was not, in my view, it was not altogether a successful test. But in any case, I don't know, George, you got anything to add at this point? Or you want me to just keep...
Too much to add.
Okay, all right.
I think you stated the programs were started in 60s. It wasn't until we didn't organize a Native American program. The first club was started in probably 69.
It was, yes.
And my brother Will and I got to talking about it, and I spoke to him, and he told me he'd already been thinking about it, and so then we talked around, and Dick Wilson was here on campus he was in volcanology, or...
He was a mathematician and volcanologist.
Yeah. And
Menominee Sioux.
And he was very interested in a well, we were calling it not exactly a club, but it was like an Indian club. And we had James Florendo was here, and so we were talking about, well, what are we going to call it? And we came up with I don't know if it was Salish, Wasco.
It's a combination of Papago, which is they call themselves O'odham people.
O'odham, yeah.
Uh-huh. Spiliai O'odham, Coyote, people of the Coyote.
Yeah, Spiliai
O'odham.
Yeah, it was a combination.
Yeah.
And so that's what we called ourselves. And we had meetings and tried fundraising. We tried to get money to bring what was that Indian woman singer,
Buffy St. Marie.
Buffy St. Marie. She claimed to be Indian, and we were asking for her help. Would she? I'm sorry, Buffy, but you don't have a good reputation with us, maybe with other Indians, but nope, they wouldn't even talk to us. No, she does not do fundraisers. She's in there to make money. Well, go make your money. I'm not sure she was really Indian anyway, but you never know. Who knows? There was a real struggle to have recognition, and we wanted to have a place to meet. We needed a longhouse, and I'm not sure now how it came about, but the university granted us a space in one of the old Army barracks.
World War II.
World War II, which had been put up for
Right,
housing, temporary housing for the GIs when they came back. Denny just talked about that era. Well, these were left over, and right here.
Right here on this
There was
spot.
one right here where we're sitting. There's one, and they turned it over to us, and
We had it painted inside and outside.
right inside and out, and
That was the first longhouse.
the first longhouse.
It was blessed by the elders from all the tribes in Oregon.
Yep, and we needed a Native American program, not just the student union. We needed a program which would help support Indian kids coming in here who needed academic support and maybe financial and personal support. And one day, I was downtown. I lived on 260 West Broadway back then. Nice big old house. And I was walking right near there, and I saw a VW bus, a Volkswagen bus came by, and it was loaded with people. And I looked in there, and here was Denny and Ellen DeGrosse, and their children in the bus. And I, said, "Oh, hello. Oh, hey, what are you doing?" "Oh, we're traveling. We're going somewhere."
We had gone to high school together.
Yes, that's right. Down at Gold Beach we had. And they were going somewhere. Sound like Old Man Coyote. Yeah. "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm going somewhere." Oh, that's as ambiguous as anything. And he was actually going, I think he was looking for a job. They were moving from Agnes on Rogue River. And I said, "Well, why don't you stop here?" "Yeah, what? You want to go to school? You want to go to graduate school? We've got a program in counseling with a stipend for graduates." I think maybe Ellen said yes first. I don't know. They said, "Yeah, sure." They stopped here. I'm not sure where they went immediately. They might have slept in the bus. I'm not sure. But I introduced him to people in education. I was in a graduate program at that time, working on a master's in counseling. And Denny joined us, and he got into the program and started moving ahead. And then we needed to select a director for the Native American program.
Let me go back. Can I go back?
Yeah,
please?
well, okay, I'll let you this time, but
All right.
don't do that too much.
I want to name the students who were in the first cohort.
But we hadn't gotten there yet.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually we did.
In the club.
In the club.
Spigai Autumn.
Yeah, Spila Otam.
Okay, go ahead.
Ellen of DeGrasse, of course, is one. Debbie Jackson was another. Marcia Smith from Warm Springs. Althea Smith from Warm Springs. James Ferrendo. Bob Bajorkas.
Yep.
Bob Cole from Klamath.
Yep.
Larry Kaliko from Warm Springs. Moses Barnaby from Big Island, Hawaii. Ann Morris from Philadelphia, Mississippi, Choctaw. Gerald Smith, Warm Springs. John Wasson, Shoshone-Bannock. Skip Renfro, Shoshone-Bannock. Ed Enmo, 8 different tribes. Nobody knows exactly what tribes. Jim Wyatt, Warm Springs. Phil Parker, Shawnee.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the first cohort.
Are you sure? Seth, someone from down at Chiloquin. What was his name?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about Seth.
Yeah. He had one of those common, unusual accidents in which his beautiful Camaro or whatever it was flew right off the highway off a turn and smashed.
Yeah.
A common accident for some upset Native people.
But I guess the point of mentioning those names is that for many of them, this felt like Mars. This campus felt like Mars. It felt like a place that was not home. It was not a comfortable place. Barry Tolkien, who was in the Department of English at the time, had gathered a bunch of Indian kids together and to try to figure out why Indian kids were having such a hard time in passing basic English 101. And so he spent weeks just talking with people to talk about what would a class that supported Indian kids look like, what would it feel like. One of the first things they did was they found a room that had a large round table. They got rid of all the desks that, where we're looking at the back of somebody's head. And then they talked about what kind of things would be appropriate for writing projects. What kind of things could you write about, and what kind of things could you not typically write about for cultural reasons? What were things that were sort of taboo among your group that would be expected in a sort of typical English 101 course? And so they talked about those kind of things. And so Tolkien ran the really first successful class for Native Americans in English. And everyone who took that class basically passed because they made a real effort to design the class in geometric terms that were comfortable to Indian people. It was much more circular, it was much more fluid, it was less linear and less segmented. He did that for 2 years. And then he turned the class over to me. And at that time, I was a volunteer counselor with the Native American Student Union with a guy named Denny Baker, who was a Shoalwater Quinault from Washington State. And so we became Denny Incorporated. Denny was... we were the two counselors for the club, for the Spili Iotum. And then I went to Alaska in 72 and was up there for a year. And in the meantime, a group of people had gone to the state legislature. Among them, Ellen Hasty, who was a Shawnee woman, Pearlie Smith from Project 75, Felipe Canedo from the Sesamex program, or Sesamex Student Union, and Alfonso Cabrera, and a guy named Bobby Anderson. They'd all gone to the legislature and to get money to actually put into a university support program for minority programs. They scored a huge hit with the legislature. They got about $350,000 that first year. The university's share of that was, for those times, quite a large amount of money. It was nearly $200,000. And with that, they created a program called the Equal Opportunity Program, EOP. And they hired 2 Hispanic young men from Los Angeles who had no experience in Oregon to run the program. I've forgotten the leader's name. I can't remember his name, but the assistant was a guy named Christopher Munoz. And these guys basically set up an office, and no one ever saw them after that. So they, we didn't know what they did. We didn't know what their business was. The university's response to the money was to put the money into their infrastructure. So they put the money into student services. They hired assistants for Dean Rhodes in student administration, in university administration. They hired assistants for the vice president's offices and the 3 vice presidents, Hawk, Bogan, and the other guy, I've forgotten his name. Whereas the minorities' expectation was that if the legislature's given you money to support minority programs, then we ought to have some voice in how that's structured, and particularly Indians. The Indian people who are here in the state were saying, if you're going to start a thing called an Indian program here, then by God, you've got to talk with us. You can't just hire put together a structure, hire the people to do this thing, and then say, here you are. And that's essentially what happened. In the process of that, they divided the student unions from the program. So it became two parts. It became the voluntary student union part, which was still housed in downstairs Erb Memorial, and it became the program part, which was housed in Fenton Hall. So the first office was in Fenton Hall in 1973. And then we worked on the Longhouse. We worked the first year's job was to get the Longhouse, and we finally persuaded them to give us this space right here in the old
Barracks building.
BOQ, the old bachelor officers' quarters, was right here on this space. And there were 3 buildings. They had been used by the rehab section of the School of Education for quite a few years. Marty Acker and those guys. And then they gave up that end building that had been Marty's, and that became the Longhouse. So then we moved from Fenton Hall down here. But we still had the problem of, what do we do with the student union? How can we have a Native American program and a Native American student union? Of the groups that were created out of the EOP program, and there were 4 of them. There were 5 of them. There was the Native American element, there was the black element, there was the Chicano element, there was the poor white element, that was Bob Coiner, and then there was the women's element. So there were 5 parts of the EOP program. And I felt that the design of the program, from Vice President Bogan's perspective and from Dr. Rhodes' perspective, was to separate the students from their program. The design was to get the students over here and the program over here. The Native Americans, the Indians, said, no, we're going to have it together. So that's why we focused on the Longhouse, was to make sure that we didn't separate the program from the student union. So when the program moved down to the Longhouse, they closed up the shop in the downstairs part of Erb and moved it over here too. So that's how that, of all those groups, only the Indians kept their student union and their program together. And that was a huge strength. We still felt like we were in a war. It felt like a war zone here. I mean, people would come here and go to work, or they'd come here as students. I don't know if people realize, but let me just go through some more of these names. Cal Pancho, Alabama Coshawty. Adrian Moody, Nez Perce. Ann Moody, Nez Perce. John Connor, Umatilla. Seon Person, Ogallala. Agnes Gozen Center, Ogallala. Buzz Nightpipe, Sioux. Twyla Sowers, Sioux. Tigre Tividad, White Earth Apache. Mark Jackson, Warm Springs. Zelma Minthorn, Umatilla. D. Olin, Athabascan, Nenana River, Alaska. Fred Aloya, half Japanese, half Eskimo, Dillingham. Alfred Soboleff, Tlingit Haida from Juneau. Ivan Dixon, a Choctaw-speaking young man who looked black. He came to us, you're in the wrong place. He started talking to us in Choctaw. He walked down by the pool tables next to P75 in the Erb Memorial Union, and the kids that were playing pool there tried to get him to come over and play pool with them. And he got over there. He had his guitar. I remember Dino carried that guitar around all the time. And right away they smelled that there was something wrong with this guy. He did not act like them. He was a Choctaw. And he was just this great kid. Tichina Scott from Ponca City, Arizona, Navajo. And then Ricky Jackson from Philadelphia, Mississippi, Choctaw. Denny Baker, Shoalwater. Norm Wasson, who came and followed his brother John Wasson. Les Howe, Grand Round.
Judy Wasson.
And Judy Wasson, yeah. Then we had Native people off campus that were helping us. Remember Pauline Ricks and Bob Tom and people like that. Yeah, Wilma Crow. So we had a community that focused on the Longhouse, plus we had Indian people from Umatilla, from Burns Paiute, from Siletz, who would stop at the long. We had people sleeping on the floor in the Longhouse because there was no place else for them to go.
My memory of all this is not like Denny's. I was hired by the university in 1969. I found a message written on the side of a newspaper. I rented rooms out this big house downtown, and one of the boys had received a phone call for me, and instead of writing a message, he just wrote this name and number: Shirley Wilson, 3425135. How's that? That was Student Services. And I thought, I wonder who that is. No message. And so I picked up my phone, and I was in graduate school then. I was starting my program in counseling. They didn't have a program for counseling Native American Indian students, so they put me into a program, rehabilitation, rehab counseling. And we often laughed at that, like, yeah, okay, a lot of Indians need some rehab in all kinds of, for all reasons. And so anyway, that's where I went through, and Marty Acker became my advisor. He was the closest, and Gordon Dudley was another good one, our advisor, the closest to dealing with American Indians. And it was in that time that I met Denny in the bus and invited him over, and then he left, and I was hired. I called that phone number, and Shirley Wilson, I said, "This is George Wasson." She said, "Oh, Mr. Wasson, I'm so happy you called me. I've been trying to get you. We want to offer you a job." I went, "What?" "Yes, we want to offer you a job as an assistant dean of students." Me from Pistol River, Oregon, Gold Beach, Curry County. I had flunked out of college 4 times, I think, and now I was back in graduate school, making it. So I went over to visit. Sure enough, they wanted to break out of the mold of having a dean of students, a dean of men, dean of women. Golda Wickham was dean of women, and I can't think of the name. But they said, yes, we want to break out of that. So they were going to hire 5 assistant deans of students. What a brilliant idea. There were 5 programs. They hired 5 of us. Jane Ferrand, DeGidio, a Polish Italian woman from Midwest or somewhere, and David Zumwalt, who was associated with the poor white realm, Lucius Bain, who had been a professional football player, well-known black guy around. And then I said Francesco Loera, he was another one. And me, I was the Indian, I was the token Indian. They had their bases covered. I'm sorry to speak against anybody if you're still alive and around hearing this, but that was the point. George can take care of all the Indian problems that come into for counseling. Francesco can take care of all those Mexicans, and it was their plot. Maybe they weren't wording it, but it was there. And I know it was there because then I had people making comments to me. Yeah, well, I'm pushy. And that's one reason they wanted me around, because on campus. because I cared about things. This is not really about me, but it's how my experience and memory ties in with what Denny has been explaining. And I was upset with them because they wanted to hire directors for the programs, and they wanted to hire an Indian for the Native American program. And I knew that Denny could do the job. And they said, Rhodes, I think it was, or some of those people up there, who actually detested me because I was a thorn in their side. I was fighting for the students. I was battling the administration and all of the administrative rules. I said, I want to put Denny DeGrosse up as a candidate for director of the program. And they said, oh, but he's not an Indian. I said, oh, how do you know this? What is an Indian? Let me tell you. His wife is Indian, and his children are. And I said, and I'm calling his mother. And his mother told me, yes, we know there is some blood back in our family. And finally they gave in and said, okay, that's good enough. Then he came here and blasted into the program and blasted things wide open. His memory of those details is marvelous. I was too busy on campus with students who had academic difficulties, were flunking out, and we didn't have counseling, personal counseling. I was running around with all of the students on campus unrest. I was out all night long where they were building bonfires and they were bombing the halls and running around trying to stop that intercession between the students, between the police and the administration. And still, Native American program coming along. It ended up with some of us establishing the beginning of Whitebird Clinic. And then we began to be free to back away from some of that. Then I could take more time with the Longhouse. But there was still the battle of why do we have to have a program? Why? And I was, you can come back in here a minute with yours and you'll fill in some areas that I've left out. We've known each other too long. I could tell him to hush up or whatever. And he's taking notes. He'll know what I've left out. And they were abolishing the programs. Bill Boyd, William Boyd, affectionately known as Null and Void. Now, I'm not ashamed to downgrade him. I'm sorry, in the Longhouse, that's a bad thing to do. But I can't help it. He was the one, not me. He was the bad one, not me. I'm only relating what's true. I went to a meeting in Johnson Hall when they were talking about the programs. And they are saying they didn't need one. And I said, well, you need programs for students. You've got the Honors College, and President Boyd exploded and just pointed at me. He said, that is not analog. He was from the islands off Georgia, I think, or somewhere out there. Carolina, I don't know. He didn't understand me. I was pointing out that they're all white kids in Honors College, and they all came from better off upper class families. There are no kids of color in there, not because they weren't smart enough, but I say it was because they didn't have the help from the very beginning like white kids in better class, social class did. And that made them angry at me. Then I had to go to another meeting with the administration, and I was talking about why. Why do we need more Indians here? Because they need someone like them around. Someone who understands and thinks like they do. They're coming from reservations and some from urban areas, but they still have the common knowledge and understanding of what everyone calls the Indian way, or the Indian way, you want to call it. And it's a common understanding. And I said, we need that critical mass to make it work. And one of the administrators raised his hand and said, but George, we have a lot of foreign students in here, and some of them are dark-skinned, like Indians. Doesn't that make them feel better and more welcome around here? And I couldn't talk. I was so stunned. I was angry, and I don't remember now how I responded. But that was the attitude. And I'll say again, I mentioned this yesterday, I'm afraid there are too many administrators around who still have a lingering notion like that. It's like the difference between deer and antelope. The deer and antelope do not play. They don't play together. They're not the same. They don't mix. Well, it's virtually the same way with Indians and non-Indians, except there's a change in there. But it's not that just because there's someone with dark skin, you're going to identify with them. No, it's a different perspective altogether. Denis DeGrasse has many stories about the Longhouse and its development and eventual demise. I know.
More of the context. There was a lot going on in Indian country from the takeover of Alcatraz, the takeover of Wounded Knee, the Wounded Knee occupation of Pine Ridge, the takeover of the Mount Rushmore Monument by AIM, the American Indian Movement, of which I'm a charter member. We had the Little Red Schoolhouse in Minneapolis that was developed by Eddie Benton. Leonard Pelletier came to the university before he ended up in jail. We had, I've got the picture here. I want to give Gordon of Dennis Dennis Banks when Dennis came here to speak to the student union, and we had Jan Oliver arranged to have Dennis. Dennis stayed at my house while he was here. In fact, later Dennis was a fugitive from the state of South Dakota. The governor of South Dakota had basically put a contract out on Dennis Banks, and we moved Dennis around Oregon and Washington for about a year and a half. He was
all these little things.
Yeah. Well, we moved Dennis around for about a 2-month
Yeah.
period in this area, and then we moved him over. Gordon Azure took him over at Central Oregon. He took him for a while, and then they passed him up to Umatilla. They passed him up to Yakima. They passed him around in order to keep him safe because he was really. They were after him. They were going to kill him.
I don't doubt it.
And they firebombed that little trailer he was in over there, and we think it might have been bombed by agents of the state of South Dakota. Finally, Governor Tom McCall stepped in and persuaded Dennis to come in and turn himself in, and which he did. He then got the protection of the state of Oregon. This is written up in the Oregon Journal. You can research that little story. The Dennis one of his well-known partners was Russell Means, who recently died. He died in 2012, June of 2012. They all came here. They've all been to the University of Oregon. So the whole, in fact, we had several of our students had participated in the Alcatraz takeover. The two Wasson brothers, John Wasson and his brother Norm, had both participated in the takeover at Alcatraz. So it was in the air. It felt like a combat that was going on here, and for both students and people who were hired in those program positions, it was a very hard place to come to work. That much I remember. But what it really underscored from my perspective was a difference in expectation. There was a clash between, the university thought that all they had to do in order to serve minorities was to beef up their core administrative functions. What the expectations of American Indians and other minorities was when they came under the early EOP was that somehow they would be able to change the institution itself, that the institution would itself become more amenable and more accepting of those worldviews. And I'm sorry to say, I think to a large extent that failed. I don't believe that I think the university is a very resilient institution. It has long roots, ancient roots in a Western society that is a linear society that I think are very resistant to change. The whole question of whether or not an Indian kid could ever come to the university who was a traditional kid from a native setting like an Alaska village or a reservation and feel comfortable here, I think is still a moot question. I don't know that it ever really happened. We had the one incident, the Althea Smith incident. I can think of many of them, but we had a couple of suicides here. We had Althea Smith involved in a confrontation with her dorm non-Indian dorm members, and there were negotiations that went on over that incident that went on for 3 days, 24 hours a day. That thing just didn't stop. We had 22 young Native men in dorms here that ended up in my house, camped in my house for over 2 weeks because they left the dorm. They couldn't live there. And so we had them stacked every place in my house, and we had them in Larry Kalika's house down the road. Larry had a house about a block away, and so we had some on his floor. A young man named John Wayne Ruff from Northern California was in that group. His best friend was Twyla's brother, Buzz, and young John Wayne, he said, "I can't live there. I can't live in that dorm. It's just too alien. It felt like a foreign country to me." So there was a lot that had to be done in order to make the university a place that would be accepting of the worldview of American Indians. We had
Right.
people from Plummer, Idaho, from Kamei, from Nez from Nespelem. We had one of the Sampson kids from Nespelem, and the other thing that people don't realize, I think, is that when we were at our height, we were getting about 100, and I think we calculated about 105 or 110 new Indian kids every year. By the end of the year, we'd be down to 4 or
Yes.
5. I mean, this was a slaughter. And these were our bright kids.
Yes.
These were the smartest kids and these were not dumb kids. These were really bright kids. So it wasn't a question of whether or not they had the intelligence. It was a question of whether or not this place was a place for everybody. That's what the question was. It wasn't, are these kids smart enough to do university work?
Right.
We proved that they were smart enough to do university work. What we couldn't prove and what we didn't really demonstrate was whether or not an institution founded on Western rectilinear geometry could reform itself into a context that could be friendly to people with a different cultural worldview? That's the question we never really answered here.
Well, it
And I
got
think-
answered.
Did it get
It
answered?
got answered. No,
No, the answer is no.
right.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. I looked
And
around.
a lot of people got beat up.
People got beat up. We counted from 1971 until 1976, over 55 leaders of minority programs ended up leaving the university. They were gone. And this was from all the minority programs. The university found ways to get rid of people who were in their way, who did not conform to the pattern. Now, George was talking about President Boyd, and I agree. He was the problem when we filed suit. I don't know if you remember, but we had a civil rights claim against the University of Oregon, against the Dr. Boyd specifically, for a violation of the Civil Rights Act. And that was active until, you all remember that I was getting a pink slip in my envelope, my pay envelope. I got a pink slip every month for a year. They fired me every month for a year, but they couldn't get rid of me because I had tenure. So I refused to leave. So I kept getting my paycheck, and I kept getting this little slip that says you're fired. Finally, I leave in June of 1976. I finally decide, okay, I'm out of here. I told Dr. Boyd, you won't have me to bother you anymore. In the meantime, we had reached an accommodation with Boyd. We took him to a powwow. We had the encampment here in Eugene, and we got him into a teepee one night, and we had him in there for the better part of an evening with a couple of cases of beer, and we had a good time. and so I wrote him a long letter and left, and then as I was getting ready to go to Alaska in December of 1976, I get a call from Dr. Boyd. He said, I just want you to know, before you leave town, Gerald Bogan is gone, Dr. Rhodes is gone, and one other one. He'd fired 3 guys. The 3 main guys were gone. Okay. Anyway, I get this call from Dr. Boyd who said, on your way out the door, I want you to know that Bogan is gone and Rhodes has gone. And then when he named one other person. And it had been a daily fight with these guys. And I think one of the outcomes of this was a mental illness among, I wish we could talk to Mano Hernandez, the one who ended up running the Chicano program after Felipe and Alfonso bailed. Because Mano remembers the mental pressure that was on people working in that program, trying to deal with the AOP people, EOP people that they kept bringing in to dress it up. That was their answer, was if we just get the right people to run the Equal Opportunities program, it'll be okay. But it didn't work. It didn't matter who they hired in there because it still wasn't talking to the
Willetta
people.
Wilson.
Huh?
Like Willetta.
Willetta Wilson, yeah, yes. Yeah, Willetta Wilson, Chris Munoz, and the other guy, I've forgotten his name, Chris's boss. And it wasn't that they were evil people. They were not evil people. That they'd been given a job in a program that they had not constructed, that they had not consulted the populations that were to be served. So you really can't blame them. They were sort of the treaty Indians that had been brought in to kind of deal with the issue. And I think it's kind of sad in a way. Who won? I think the university won. I don't know that the university is any friendlier place now for people of a different worldview.
Well, the administrators will tell you, yes, it is.
That's what we heard from the president yesterday.
Yes. And we heard from, at lunch, what was his name at lunchtime yesterday?
Dr. Thompson?
Thompson?
Roger Thompson.
Roger Thompson. He politely disagreed with me, respectfully disagreed, that the university administrators are hearing, they are listening, and they do care. Well, I think that's true. I think they do care. But I don't know that they are any better at helping the situation than it was back in the 60s or 70s.
I don't either.
I don't know what this new program is. I know that a lot of people were upset with this, pardon my ignorance, but it's diversity and inclusion, or what do they call it?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is what it's called now.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, what the hell does that mean?
Well,
It means that there's no more individual program help. It means that spread them out thin into other places and they'll blend in? Or what?
Don't you think it's curious that, I remember the president's words yesterday. He was talking about the university as a leading research center. It seems to me that a leading research center would be interested in how people learn and the different ways that people learn, as shaped by their cultural experience. There's been a lot written, for example, about Japanese education. I've been reading a ton of stuff about the way Japanese kids are educated, and Japanese educators are upset about the way Japanese kids are educated because there's not as much in Japanese education. There's not as much sort of creative thinking allowed. There's much more rote call and response kind of educating going on, and there are some places in the United States, in elementary schools and in middle schools and high schools, that want to do that same thing. And the Japanese educator says, no, you don't want to do that. That's the wrong direction to go. But, I'm reflecting on the president's words yesterday. It seems to me that a place that prides itself in its interest in research and its leadership in research ought to be interested in the different ways that the human brain has figured out how to learn things. I'm reminded of Ed Ebbinghaus. Now, Ed Ebbinghaus was a world-famed astronomer who was at the University of Oregon, and I sat beside Ed in faculty meetings. And Ed was a conservative educator. He was conservative on everything he did. He didn't like the minority programs. He thought special programs for Indians and blacks and Chicanos was crap. And until Barry Tolkien and Ed Coleman went to Ed, and I went to Ed, and we said, look, Ed, we've got a problem with Indian kids in math. Would you meet with a bunch of Indian kids and kind of figure out what it is, what's the problem here? Why can't we get Indian kids through math programs? So Ed met with quite a few Indian kids over a long period of time, about a 2-month period. And he came back to a faculty meeting. He was on fire. He said, I got to tell you this. He said, this has been an amazing experience for me. He said, if I ever go into space, if I'm ever on a spaceship to another planet, I want an Indian to be my navigator. He said, because they have basic understanding of shape and velocity, and they have an instinctive understanding of trajectory. He said, we do it mathematically, they do it naturally. He says, we're teaching math from the wrong direction. He said, we're teaching the most abstract parts of math at grade school level. We're teaching arithmetic, which is the most symbolic thing you can do in mathematics, rather than talking about how things feel, shape, and how they, what they feel like, what they look like. He said, the Indian kid knows instinctively how a thing is shaped and can talk about it, whereas the kids that we're bringing out of school and their math experience can't do that. They don't know how to do that. He said, we need to turn our math programs around in elementary schools and in high schools, and we need to start with the concrete, which is how things actually are shaped and how things actually move through space. And then we need to move to symbolism. We need to move to arithmetic. And it got the faculty that day in the faculty was just an uproar. It was just an uproar.
You mentioned a while ago about a student who came here, Tachitni Scott.
Tachina Scott.
Tachitni
Scott, yeah.
Tachitni Scott.
Orville Scott.
Orville Scott.
From Navajo country.
All right. And he was in molecular biology, I think.
Peter von Hippel.
Okay. And one of the beautiful stories that came out of there, and Barry Tolkien found out about it, and I think von Hippel must have told him, that Tachitni was describing a double helix. And they asked him, how could you do that? He said, oh, it was really quite simple. He would look at it and think it in Navajo and then just translate Navajo into English, and there you had it. Yeah, because Navajos have words and descriptions which would indicate something like a salt shaker, which is round and columnar and is filled with tiny grains of equal size, tiny white grains of equal size. And there's Navajo words that would fit that.
It's like in Japanese, the shapes of things are described like a bottle of beer is 2 bottles of beer. Nihon, biro nihon, onegai shimasu. And nihon is a shape of a thing. We don't do that in English. We talk about a bottle of beer, but in Japanese they talk about a shape of things. And so a pencil or a beer can be a nihon, or it can be a hon. Interesting. So language has a lot to do with how we learn things. It seems to me we ought to be interested in how people learn. And that there ought to be at least part of our educational effort, our academic effort, ought to be bent toward making classrooms, having classrooms take a look at how different people learn. It seems to me there's a lot to be gained by understanding how a Polish person learns, how a Central Asian herdsman learns. That the brain is this amazing thing that we have that has figured out so many different cultural ways to look at reality. There isn't just the Western European way of looking at reality, and unfortunately, that's the way universities are formed. They're based on an idea of learning that is rooted in medieval European history, and I think that's unfortunate.
The attitude of I'm back to administration again, and I spent too many years in it myself, 22 I think it was, and I recall at one meeting, administrative staff, and there was a discussion of a disturbance. I think it was some Chicano students who were complaining about something, and they were angry and maybe protesting. And this one woman spoke up and just said, well, don't they know we're just trying to help them? And we were speechless. Like, I was saying, help them what? And someone exploded and just told it, as an administrator, that is totally insensitive. And someone else said, and bigoted. But that was a common attitude, like, if we offer a program here, they ought to appreciate it and accept what we're doing and do what we say.
One of the problems, and George has reflected a little bit on this, that one of the problems that we had at the university was that we had programs being appropriated by liberals. Our experience with political liberals wasn't entirely a good experience. We often got more mileage, if I could speak of it in those terms, from the conservative academians, like Ed Ebbinghausen, like Peter von Hippel, the ones that were skeptical about minority programs to start with, because they came at you as almost as adversaries, but they would at least engage you in discussion. But the liberals, like Gerald Bogan, who had his credentials from the voter registration drives in the South under Sergeant Shriver back in the early 60s, who came to the University of Oregon with impeccable liberal credentials as a person interested in black civil liberties. He was the guy who would, if you were in a march out on the street and you were holding a placard that, demanding something, he'd come out, grab the sign and say, I know what you need and I know it more than you do, and I'm prepared to act for you. That was the problem we had with liberals in the university, was that the liberals would step forward and say, not only do I know your problem, but I'm prepared to act in your behalf. And that was what we were running into. We were not running in, you can engage in a person who's against you. You at least have something to push against. You can say, no, that's not the way it is. Consider this. And people like Ed Ebbinghausen would consider it. They'd say, oh, yeah, well, let me work on that a little bit. But if he was a liberal to begin with, there was no arguing with them. Political liberals are, it's a dead-end street. They have no place to go. So anyway.
Somewhere around here, there is a scrapbook which contains all the newspaper clippings, letters about the minority program debacle, demise of it. And there are probably photographs in there too. I've placed 3 of them around strategically, and they're probably put into a safe place that's hard to find. But I think I've got another one, a copy. I made copies of it. Bob Coiner, I think, is one who, and
His girlfriend.
And his girlfriend
Yeah.
collected those, and
Yeah.
after the programs were gone, after Denny was out, and Anton Minthorn was in the Longhouse and being ignored by the university, but they kept paying the bills, they kept the lights on, and there were some young people, young natives, would come and sleep in the main office. There were some cots in there and mattresses, and they would hang out there. And the police contacted me about these guys. And I went over and I went in and looked around, and I realized who they were, and I knew all of them. And I said, okay, yeah, you guys can crash here if you don't get rowdy. No beer drinking here. Get the beer bottles out. And the police will leave you alone as long as you're responding to me. And the police, if something went wrong, the police would come to me and say, we are questioning something. And it was a stunning arrangement. How and why, I don't know. But they were still paying the bills. And we were still meeting in the Longhouse, and we needed a new stove. The stove was not working, and so I called up the physical plant. I said, we need a new stove in the Longhouse, and we need a coffee maker, a big automatic coffee maker. And I called, there was a vice president, what was his name? Dan Williams.
Williams, yeah.
Dan Williams. I called him up and said, we need these things in the Longhouse. He made a phone call. A stove was delivered over. We got a new coffee maker. And I called up again and said, this floor is dangerous.
It was rotten in
You
places.
walk over here and you're likely to fall through. And I said, it's really dangerous. Next thing I knew, physical plant was over. I said, what color do you want this flooring? And I said, well, something that's easy to mop. And they put in a light beige colored, almost cream colored flooring. I went, oh.
Yeah, parquet type, not parquet, but the
It was-
laminate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they covered up the rot, strengthened it, put a new floor in. And I said, it's leaking. The ceiling is bad. I kept doing this. And they kept responding. We need new windows. The windows or something. Do you remember what else? The steps are bad. They're dangerous.
I remember those steps.
And they replaced them, and I don't know who put in the ramp there. I don't know who put that in or when. Was it there when you were in?
Yeah, the ramp was there.
Okay,
Yeah, because it was Voc Rehab's building.
okay. And they said, those garbage cans, something need to be done with those. The physical plant would come over and either remove them, or I think one time they had to clean them up, or brought new ones. I can't remember the details of it. But it was stunning how the guilt from years past flowed over
Yeah,
to the remainder of the administrators. And I'd say, oh, we need such and such. Secretly he would come in. It was good. And they'd call George Wass and ask him. Oh my goodness.
they were scared to
Oh,
death of the tribes.
Yes.
They were scared to death. None. We worked for several years just to get a meeting between the chiefs and the president. We brought the tribal chairman from Warm Springs, from Siletz, from Umatilla, from Burns Paiute. We brought leaders from southern Washington, Klamath. They did not want to talk with the older people. And the day that we had the blessing on the Longhouse, when we brought in some of the medicine people from around all the native communities in the state and outside the state, then we got a few of the administrators came. I think they were kind of reluctant to be there, but it was one of those things they didn't dare not be there. You know, it was kind of a big deal. You know,
They didn't see a value in.
they didn't understand. No, they didn't. They really didn't see that. They didn't think that there was really any give that they had to make. They had actually provided the space. We gave you the Longhouse. What more do you want? It was not in their thinking that there might be something they could do in their classrooms that would be useful.
Natives could bring in.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, you know, their answer was get them more counseling. Our answer was no, get us people in instruction who are interested in the way we learn. That was our answer.
We had several meetings. Dick Hill was vice president or I don't know what, and some others around. And so they called a meeting of Indian educators. And so Indians came to campus. We had, over in the dorms, we had a big dinner, and we were meeting and talking, and there was a big sheet, a paper that you can write on, and so they were listing, okay, what are the things we want to list on here? And they would write them down. What else? And they'd write them down. Turn that over, and then they'd ask, what else? They'd write them down. And they kept doing that, and then thanked everybody for coming to visit, and the Indians went back home. Next year or 2 years later, let's have a meeting of Indians to talk about education. And they'd come back, what happened to all of those notes you took last time? Well, I don't know. And so let's talk about it. Where do we go from here?
Never left that point.
No, they never left that point. Where have we been? Where do we go from here? The most trite.
So there were several ways to look at it. One was, is it an issue of access, or is it an issue of instruction, or is it an issue of expectation about how money is managed, how, if you have something called a program for minorities, how that's handled. The university's tendency was to see it as an issue of access. They thought of an Indian program here as something that would recruit, would provide financial aid, would provide student services, so they bolstered up those parts of the university that did that. Where our community was saying, no, we're not going to have any trouble getting students. We got students. We got tons of them. We can get as many students here as we want. And we'll even solve some of the financial aid stuff. You know, even that's not a huge problem. I mean, it is a problem, but, you know, we could overcome that. The question we have is, can this institution become part of ours? Can some of this become ours? Can we own some of this? Can we do a university our way? Is it in your power to do a university our way? And that's the fundamental question. And I don't think that ever got answered. What's that?
It never got addressed.
It never got addressed. Can you do a university our way? Can you broaden the way in which you understand how human beings learn and act on what they've learned? Can you broaden that? Can you go beyond the linear worldview of, you know, reading things from left to right, you know, the grid pattern of society? Can you see the world as a circular place where time is around you rather than down the long railroad path, down the path to the right? You know, I used to do cross-cultural training things, and I'd draw a picture of a railroad descending off into the distance, and I would draw a picture of an apple. And I'd ask my classes, I'd say, which of these two symbols represent time to you? And almost all the Western, you know, American, Caucasian, European people would say, well, the railroad, you know, those descending, and the telegraph poles getting smaller and smaller and smaller into the distance to the right, that's a pretty good timeline. I can figure that out. And you're going from here to there, and there's always better than here. And, you know, where I'm going to be on the timeline is better than where I am. And, you know, don't judge me by what I've been, but judge me by what I'm going to become. Don't cry over spilt milk. That's water over the dam. Judge me. Let's look to the future. Let's not have the past. That's the way we do history in this country. We don't remember things. People were horrified in 1972 when America revolted against the Vietnam War, and there was bombings, and this image of Vietnam veterans rolling their wheelchairs up to the steps of the White House and throwing their medals at the White House, pissed off because of the war. Americans couldn't understand that. Had they read their history, they would have seen that in 1863, in June of 1863, the city of New York erupted into an anti-draft riot that killed the police chief, the fire chief, assistant mayor. It killed over 4,000 people in the city of New York. It brought the 7th Cavalry in from the recent defeat at the Second Battle of Manassas to put down the revolt. The movie, The Gangs of New York, with what's his name, is about that event, and it's actually pretty well done. It really depicts in a fairly accurate way what actually happened, but it's not in any high school textbook in the United States. The story of the draft rebellion of 1863, it just isn't there. Americans don't remember their history because they're not past-oriented. Indians are past-oriented. Indians can tell you, and that's why it's so sensitive yet. You know, you get someone from Wounded Knee talking about the first Wounded Knee, and you know they can get pretty emotional about their family that was killed in the massacre at Wounded Knee, and in the 1880s, as if it happened yesterday, because the way Indians view time isn't linear. It's
not.
That was my family.
It's not. It's more than that, and you're going to have to read my essay on this because it's not linear, it's not circular, it's spherical.
Spherical, yes.
I'd like to talk about the Indian concept of spherical time, because whatever happens in your body and your memory or your experience is an expenditure of energy. And that energy doesn't go that direction,
right,
or it doesn't go that direction, it expands. All it can do is expand, and it expands spherically. And your memory, anybody's memory, is an expansion of experience. And some things that happen with great intensity mean that there's more adrenaline in your body, so you remember it. With adrenaline, the memory sticks tight, and that means that memory doesn't expand very far away. It stands, so it hangs like a cloud around your body, around everybody. Indians see it, the memory of the past is right here. That's why they can remember all of these intensities so well, because it does. But other things might expand faster, like light from the sun or from the bulb going out, and it goes out and it's more distant. But the more intense things are hanging close, a ready access memory, because it's everywhere around you. It's not forward or back. So you're right.
Well, I think it's, you know, the university is laid out in the European fashion, the grid fashion, the linear left to right fashion, and you know, we're a society of planners. We are always anticipating, you know, we have songs like "She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes." There's this anticipation of the future in our society that is, you know, the future is exquisite in our world, in the dominant culture's worldview. What I'm going to be is always better than where I am. I'm not interested in yesterday's news. I want to know I want to be on the cutting edge of things. I want to be new. I want to be fresh. And so we're always planning how to have a better future in the Western world. And that serves us well when it comes to business practices and maybe even in a scientific method. But I would simply remind people that Indian people had a scientific method too, and that was use and experience, and essentially arrived at many of the same conclusions about substances in this world that modern sciences have come to. All but two of the entire lexicon of the pharmacopoeia were used and discovered by Indians.
Well, I mean, you know, regarding spherical thinking, I think really two good examples on our campus of almost genius level was Gene Scott and Conrad House. Conrad, a great internationally well-known artist, and Ticini. I went to see him talk at Fort Lewis and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, didn't something like that kind of show the administrative and academic community that this is the edge of the iceberg? Or did they see it as a fluke,
No.
or it just went by?
Yeah, I remember Peter von Hippel, rather, who was Mr. Scott's academic advisor,
Yeah.
trying to make headway on that issue with the administration, trying to say, look at this guy. This guy came up with an idea that we could not have done because of our culture. Our culture blocks us from this kind of thinking.
Exactly.
And it was basically, so what? You know, it was so what? That was the university's response, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, that is really interesting. Don't you have a new formula here that you ought to be looking at?
It's not good evidence. It's the best research center.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it doesn't speak well for that trajectory, does it? Yeah. Orville was, I don't know if you know Orville, but he's a great guy. Yeah. I have lost contact with him. I haven't talked with him for a long time, but
Last I knew, he was at Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, but I don't know now.
okay.
Lisa has a question or comment.
Yeah, it's really been valuable for me to be here and listening to you, because I came in at a time that you were leading, but I didn't know anybody's name, I see faces. But I want you to know that is the seminal question still. Is it an issue of access, or is this an issue of, they have a word for it now through a research paper. I saw it on the Steve Marzini seminar, place making, and that's what we do in
It's called what?
place making.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's a
so-
great word. I like that.
Yeah, so this is what I want to say is, because you asked that question, what happened? And you had gone to Alaska by then. And there were new people, and again, I
Kim,
and it was
And-
Gary Kim,
Yeah.
Gary Kim,
Bob Tom.
Bob
And
Tom.
those are the ones I remember, and I was taking notes, and I wish I knew more names, and maybe, and so they did, that is, what you're talking about, that research that you already knew, what Native people already automatically knew that, for me anyway, as an Asian American, I didn't know how to express what I needed. That model works for everybody. It works for white students. And the model they found the money in AOP, they got the alliance of the Senate, and they came up with the plan, and I know what the plan is because I was the secretary. And I'm
Right.
sorry that I threw away all the notes after the demise, which broke the community in half.
Yeah.
And it was a bloody war, at the end of Council for Minority Education, and so
And this is all that's left. This thing here.
And we're gonna dismantle the last piece.
This is the last piece.
The last piece is that writing class for our kids.
Oh, yeah.
They took, I don't know if they kept them out, but all they kept was tutorials. The grants are gone, but the last piece I wanted to tell you, they just told the guy that he doesn't have a job
Wow.
to teach a writing class that fit our mode of learning, or anybody's mode of learning,
Right.
you know? So,
The-
sometime I wanna,
This issue of place, it's a wonderful way to think about it.
Yeah.
You know, and it really boils down to the question, is this my university as well as your university?
exactly.
Is this my university?
And what you saw last night at that dinner is they're trying to camouflage things, but the people that are the placemakers on campus were not the kids on that panel.
I didn't think so.
And the
Those were the achievers, the
placemakers-
achievers.
There's a few placemakers on that adult panel that
Yeah.
were Native people that was not a placemaker person that
Right.
was on the panel. So it's interesting to me how I think they sense who the placemakers are, and it's scary for them, and so.
I think we need a revolution in higher education, and we're going to get it in a way we never imagined. And the way we're going to get it is that they are going to lose all this. And why they're going to lose all this is because higher education is going to quickly become digital. There's going to be severe competition to the standard university format, and it's already coming online. I mean, it's not perfect yet, but you wait, hold on to your seat, because this is going to be a rough ride. It's going to hurt. Universities are going to be shocked at what happens in the next 10 years to higher education. They will not be able to maintain this kind of structure very long. It's like farming in France. It's a green shell. In France, they've used pesticides and herbicides so heavily that basically they've got a green shell. There are no live worms or no nematodes in the soil. There are no birds in France. And so you travel across the French countryside and it looks beautiful and green and verdant, but it's dead. It is a dead world. They've compacted their soil to lost 8 inches of elevation because the huge machines that roll over and we're doing the same thing in Iowa. But universities are in an analog way sort of doing the same thing. Universities are going to face a reality with the new digital world that they won't know how to handle. It's going to outstrip their ability to do that.
I don't know where this will go, this film. I don't know what value it is. I think other documentaries have been made. I'm going to finish up with something here. And it's about this longhouse. I have to speak my mind on it. I wasn't the only person, but I was one of the few who approached and jabbed at the administration to get a new longhouse. And I finally got Larry Large, who was a vice president, to admit, to commit, yes, and he even came to a powwow over in Mac Court. And he said, the university is committed to a new longhouse. Well, how that was going to happen, I don't know. I didn't know, and he didn't either. But he said, yes, he was going to do it. dribbled on for a while with one president and then another. And then finally, we got down to planning a longhouse. And I was on the first users committee, and I was quite vocal about it. It might surprise you, but I spoke up. And talking with other users, what do we need? What should it be like? What are the amenities? What do we need? And my effort was that we need a place of multi-use. We need a place for many people. This is not just a house, a club for Indian kids. No, it's more than that. It's not just statewide, it's Northwest wide. We got an architect from Seattle to come down, and we talked about what would be good. So we planned up on this rise up here where the parking lot is now. It was a multi-structure place where many activities could happen at the same time, and it was agreed, yes, that would be there. Well, someone got tired of our extravagant plans for a big longhouse. And the user committee, planning committee was abolished. And another committee was put together. I was not part of it. Their claim was it would cost too much to build a longhouse the way that John Paul and the rest of us had planned out, which would have satellite units where many things could happen, be multi-use. They turned it into a one room like this. It's beautiful design, but it's a one room use. The kitchen is accessible to the people. There's an amazing fireplace which can smoke and be traditional feeling, but they cut it down to just a one room, and they didn't plan for an office for the caretaker, for the custodian, or what's the title anyway? They didn't plan for storage. They didn't plan restrooms. And they didn't plan that people might want to dance here. So there is somewhere in the works, there's another plan to expand this, to expand to the east. And I spoke up and said, but you need to have room for dance. Not a powwow dance necessarily, but some traditional dancing. I mentioned the tribes, Northern California, Southern and Western Oregon. We are traditional dancers, and we need a plank house and a floor to dance in. And they agreed that would happen. But I'm disappointed from the beginning. I think the university administration sold us short. They didn't want to put money into a major building. This is one of the most booked up and used venues on campus. I tried to tell them. They weren't listening. At least there's a chance that it might be enlarged. And that's my end of that for now. Go ahead. Yep.
Are you taking a break? Are you still-
I'm sorry?
Are you taking a break or are you quitting?
I'm quitting,
Are you?
unless you've got other things.
No,
I wanted to ask a couple.
Oh, go ahead. I'd be happy. Yeah, the name I was given at Warm Springs is Nawetwit, which means, Larry Kalika used to laugh at this, great wind. He said, and you can take that any way you want.
Winds of change.
My question is,
It was great. I tell you, the mornings were the best. It started at Fenton Hall. And when you open the office doors in the morning, and there'd always be 8 or 10 kids in there getting ready for class, and we'd make coffee. Well, the Chicano program was right down the hall, and of course, Alfonso usually came down for coffee because it was more fun with the Indian group than it was with his own group. One day he comes down there, and James says, Alfonso, he says, did you hear about the riots at Hunters Point in San Francisco? And James said no, or Alfonso said no. He said, yeah, he says, the Indians down at Hunters Point and the Chicanos there are fighting this morning. There was a big fight. And Alfonso, who liked the Indian kids, he says, oh no, that's terrible. He says, what happened? And James said, with a straight face, he said, well, those doggone Chicanos were throwing dynamite, sticks of dynamite at the Indians. And Alfonso said, what were the Indians doing? And James said, they were lighting it, throwing it back. But stuff like that was going on all the time. So the best time of the day was usually the morning. And there was always some planning going on. I mean, there was always things going on. The kids had things, projects that they were doing. They'd come bring their homework in there, their schoolwork, and there were always, I don't know, 8, 10 kids in there on everything from math to English, or questions about, the dorm room or whatever. It was, and I have to tell you, Dave did a lot of the, handling of a lot of this stuff. He was amazing with those kids. That was the best part of it. It was when we had to go outside those walls to deal with the university that it wasn't so pleasant. Yeah.
Do you recall the time when Alfonso and those guys were making tortillas for us? And they brought them down hot tortillas with the butter and the lemon and salt. And they blew out all the other kids.
Yes. They had set up this hot plate. And everything went out. The whole building. Yeah. Yeah.
Best tortillas I ever tasted.
Yeah. It was also the opening of gender liberation, and in Fenton Hall, the men's restroom had a row of urinals, and I'm standing at a urinal along with about 8 other guys, and I'm sort of got my eye back, and a woman walked by me in the back, went over and washed her hands, and then walked out, and I punched the guy next to him. I said, "Did you see that?" He says, "I wondered if you did too." So you had those little adventures going on too.
There were stalls in there too, weren't there?
There were stalls, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But she was making a statement,
Well, I didn't- Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Stalls, yeah. She
Yeah.
made her statement in there. She didn't.
yeah. She made
You
a
just said
statement.
urinals or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember everybody mixing up Far Bread in there, for the powwows and stuff, they were turning out huge bowls of Far Bread over.
We had the best powwows in those days. We'd bring those drums in from the Springs and from Cave Falls and from Portland, and I loved those powwows. One time we're coming back from a powwow, Tony Menthorn and me and Norm Wasson and Jody Kalika. And we're coming back from a powwow at Umatilla, and I think it might have been Tony's VW Bug, but we rolled it. We rolled it right there in the highway on a curve, and it came back up on its wheels. And we're sitting there, I'm looking up, and you can see the dents in this thing. And Tony said, "Get out." So we all got out of the VW, and Tony said, and I'm not making this up, "Walk around." So, just like a powwow, we all walked around. We all walked around the VW, and then someone started singing. walk around.
Did it run?
Yeah, I ran. We got into Eugene. It was all beat to crap, but it was funny. But I have to tell you, I think there was a price to pay. The price that was paid was in mental health. I think it made a lot of us crazy. I think it led to a lot of alcohol abuse and drug abuse. I think your own brother was a victim of this stuff. I was a victim. I think my family was a victim. I think the casualty, I think that I experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome as a result of my experience here. And I'm still uncomfortable in Eugene. I cannot come into this town without my skin feeling a little bit creepy crawly. I have to tell you, it's after all these years. It is an eerie feeling.
And I developed migraines for about 10,
Oh yeah, I
10,
remember.
12 years.
Yeah. And you had an employment issue going with the state on this thing?
I did, but I couldn't continue. I couldn't
Yeah.
stand doing it.
I couldn't do it. I left here a wreck. I got to Alaska, and it took me a long time to relax. And I've talked to Mano Hernandez about it. He's over in Bandon now. And Eugene gives him the same feeling. It was a traumatic experience. And to this day, I don't know really what it was about. I don't know, did we gain anything except the experience? I know, what was it that we got out of this?
The scary part of all of it is that you can fight the battle, you can hold a conference on Indian education, you can write down all the notes up there, you can do all the videos you want, you can keep all the scrapbooks you want, but in the end, whoever has those, whoever caused the problems you've dealt with, are going to go away. And someone will come in to replace them. And someone else will come in and they'll have a new idea. What's the problem? Oh, here's a solution. And we're in that stage right now. They believed there was a problem. They didn't like the situation. They're cleaning house, and they're going to come up with the right solution.
This is the second phase of that, absolutely.
You know what it's called? It's called lack of institutional memory.
Yeah,
Oh,
it is.
yes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Choose not to
absolutely.
remember.
Yeah.
So we have nothing, that's why I was so desperate to get you guys together and have this tape.
This
Because
was great.
we're getting older, and we really think the kids need to know that, you're here and there are some good things that are happening here, and maybe it'll always be here. But there are many good people who came here
Well,
and went on to do good work.
I see these kids as
Maybe
heroes.
some didn't
I see these kids, these first kids that came in here, they're the heroes. They came in and basically threw themselves in front of the tanks. And
yes,
It made it easier for us.
yes. I'm going to tell you say one more thing on this lack of institutional memory. And I suffered migraines for all these years. I would be out all night long on campus with students, bonfires, bombing. When they were trying to bomb Johnson Hall, I was out there. I was over at education, over at ROTC, and then one night, someone said they've got Oregon Hall. Oregon Hall was my office. It was the administration. It was a combination of the old barracks building, old wooden buildings.
Oh, that Oregon.
That
yeah,
Oregon
that
Hall.
Oregon Hall.
No, that was Emerald Hall.
Emerald
Was
Hall.
it called
No,
Emerald?
it was Emerald Hall.
Yeah.
Sorry. I named Oregon Hall
Right, that's
because I
the-
found the old plaque. Anyway, I'm the one that caused to be put up there, named Emerald Hall. And I left Johnson Hall, where crazies had been throwing beer bottles at at the fire trucks. They threw bottles and cracked the windows on the fire truck. It would come over, and it was, who was there? I don't know. They weren't all students. It was wild. And I heard that Emerald Hall was gone, and I said, no, it's not. I zoomed through there, made my way through several thousand deep, and I made my way up the steps and just pushed people aside, and I opened the door and I looked in, and here were these crazies in there. They were tipping over typewriters. One girl came toward me with a fire extinguisher, and I was pissed off. My office is right up there. And they were going to burn it down. That was in a registrar's office, a business office. All of the administration was in those wooden buildings. All our records were paper. They were about to be burned, and I was angry. I went down there, just went right down like I knew what I was doing, like I was boss. I said, put that down. You, get out of here. Stop that. Get out. Bam, bam, get out. Stop it. I came to a door. Someone was struggling at a door, and I grabbed a guy by the shoulder and said, stop that. Come back. I looked, and it was someone, Barnhart, head of in the housing department. He was tussling with a student. I grabbed him, pulled him back, said, hey, you come on. Close the door. I looked around there, and at the front door, there was a guy looking through, and it was a football player with not the best reputation. And I'll say it anyway. His name was Rocky Pamplin. And I just said, Rocky, guard that door. They had emptied out. I went upstairs. I got my big, I have a basket with a pomo, huge basket like that, a pomo basket. And I had a Navajo blanket up there. I had all kinds of, in my office. I gathered those up, and my cousin had come around, and she helped me, and we sneaked out down the hallway and out the back stairway into her car it was Onyx. They hadn't thought about being around there. We got in her car and ran away. Well, before I left, I got on the phone and I called a secret number. Shirley answered. And because I would call them from all around campus and give a report of what was going on. Well, the secret number was over across the mill race in, who are those people across the mill race? Anyway, maintenance or something. Physical plant, yeah. And she said, George, where are you? I said, well, I'm calling from my office. Get out of there! It's gone! They're burning it. I said, no, they're not. He said, get out of there! The building is gone. They're burning it. It's going up in flames. And the administrators were all over there with the police, hidden in
Bunkers.
central control. I said, no, it's not. It is not. It's emptied out. They're gone. They're out the door. And they wouldn't believe me. And some officer came online, and I came on the phone, and I was practically yelling. I said, no. And they, oh, hey, they're burning it. I said, no, they're not. I hung up the phone, went out the back door, and went home. Do they care? Did anyone really care? Do they even know it?
What year was that?
That would be in 70 what? I can't remember. Well, it was before we moved down to Oregon Hall, so it'd be 75.
I lived in
I wonder what that was about.
Was that after you were gone?
76, it would have been 76.
Okay. About 76, it was just before we
Yeah.
moved. That was after the bombing of Esslinger
Messlinger, yeah.
and PLC. They tried to bomb Johnson Hall, but it fizzled.
Right.
What was that about? I wonder.
Uh,
It wasn't the war, that ended in 75, was it?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
The underground weathermen were involved in it.
Well, maybe it was before 75.
I think it was. Yeah, that one particular one, that was. That would have been 71 or 72.
I was fairly new, yeah.
71 maybe.
Yeah,
71?
yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I was really new to campus because I just got here in 70, so
yeah.
I have no memory.
I do remember you saying this story. I think it must have been at Barry Tolman's. I do remember
Yeah.
that you saved the building and you had to argue with the police
Yeah.
that it was okay. I remember.
I got so angry because I would go out and talk with demonstrators and come back and say, George, what are they saying? What are they saying, George? And I said, well, go talk with them. Go talk with them. And then one morning, at a early staff meeting, I think I made it to one. I sometimes wouldn't sleep all night, and I'd still try to go to work and have to go to sleep. But said, George, when you go back out there, be sure to tell them the name is Bogan, not Bolin.
Not Bolin.
Not Bolin. The
It's
name
Bogan.
is Bogan, not Bolin.
Make sure they get the right guy.
I remember Bolin now. He had a piece of property down in Brookings.
He grew up down there.
Yeah, he grew up
on the
in-
Windchuck.
On the Winchuck River, yeah.
Fellows, I cannot thank you.
I got to tell you one story that happened, one thing that happened to me. You know, before I became director of the Native American program, I was an English teacher in the English department. I had several jobs. I was, well, but I was getting a stipend in order to go to graduate school, but Barry got me a position teaching English in order to, because I had a family, you know, I had kids and 3 kids and a wife, and so I was teaching English, but I ran out of Indian kids. I had done all the Indian kids in the English class that I could. They were all through, and so I had that last quarter or semester to do. And Barry said, Stoddard Malarkey says you have to teach a course this year, or you're not going to get paid. I mean, this semester. I said, well, I'm done with all the Indian kids. He says, you're going to have to take a regular class. I said, God, I don't know if I can do that. I mean, I know how to do the English thing with the Indian kids, but he says, oh, you'll come up with something. Just be creative. What the heck am I going to do? So I got some guys from the rehab section to help me out. I got Mason Davis and a guy named Paul Perkins to help me. And on my first day of class, teaching this all-white class in English 101, I went in as a biker. I went in dressed as a biker with a helmet and about a 4-day growth of beard and dirty Levi's and whatnot. And I had Paul Perkins go in as me. And I had Mason over here on the side dressed very nicely, like a preppy. And so Paul is up in the front of the class, and he's writing my name on the board, my name is Denny DeGrasse, I'm the instructor, yada, yada. This is English 101, yada. And he's got the syllabus, and he goes to the podium, and he's saying, my name is Denny DeGrasse, and yada, yada, yada. And I'm sitting over here on the left side, and about the 3rd row back, and I say, what the hell do you know about English? You look too young to know anything. And Paul played this thing so well. He said, well, sir, he says, if you don't like this, you certainly don't have to stay for this course.
The guys from counseling program in education, rehabilitation.
Yeah, they're all rehab
counseling.
guys over in the rehab
We were all graduate friends.
we're
together.
all friends. And Paul is playing me, and he's saying, well, if you don't like it, sir, you can take another course. And we had scripted this out pretty thoroughly. And I said, it looks to me like you're not old enough to have the kind of experience it takes to teach this class. Why don't you get the hell out of this classroom? And Mason Davis jumps up over on the side, and he says, sir, you can't talk to the instructor that way. And people are getting nervous. And there's this young woman sitting in front of me, and she turns around, she says, something like, "You scumbag, why don't you get out of here?" And some kid in the back, he's urging me on. He says, "Go get him, go get him." And finally, a young woman in the back gets up. She's got her books in her arms, and she's headed out the door. And I'm thinking, we didn't talk about what we'd do if someone got scared enough that they would leave. And you can see on Paul Perkins's face the same realization. Oh my God, we didn't mean for anybody to get so scared that they would leave. And Mason jumps up and tries to head her off. And he's at the door, and he says, "Miss," he says, "are you in the wrong class?" She says, "You bet your sweet ass I am." And out the door she goes, and I'm thinking, we're all thinking she's going to go talk to Stoddard Malarkey, and I'm going to be duck soup by the time it's all over. And so Paul and I got eye contact, and we shortened the script right away. We cut right to the chase. And in the script, I was supposed to jump up and challenge him to a fight. And Paul, so we got this verbal thing going, and I jumped up, and because we didn't want any more of these unexpected casualties to happen, and I jumped up. I knocked my chair over. Students are diving away, and I'm up like this, and I got my helmet off, and Paul is coming from around the podium, coming at me, and this kid in the back is yelling, "Yeah, go get that son of a bitch," And we walked down the row between the seats, and we walked right by each other. Paul came around, picked the chair up and sat in it, and I went up to the front of the room and got behind the podium and stood there and looked out at the class. And there was this silence, and we just let it sit there for a long time. It had to have been a couple of minutes. And nobody's saying anything. No, hardly anybody breathing. I mean, the panic was palpable. You could feel it in the room. And finally I said, "My name's Denny DeGrasse, and I'm the instructor in this class, and this is Paul Perkins, my friend, and this is my friend Mason Davis. And what we want you to do, the assignment in this class this semester is you're going to keep a journal. And what I want you to do is I want you to write this experience up, and then I want you to bring what you wrote to me at the end of the week, and I want you to quarter turn that experience, and I want you to write about it again. I want you to look at every element of that experience, and I want you to really examine this thing. I want you to examine yourself, and I want you to recall all the events in that incident as clearly. And I tell you, those kids wrote and wrote. It was like they couldn't stop talking about it. They filled journals with their descriptions of how they felt and why it was good and why it was bad. And I would have these kids running into me on the street years later. I'm running into one in Portland who came up and grabbed me by the shirt. "You still scare the hell out of me, but boy, that was a great." We had more fun with that thing.
You're making me homesick for graduate school. Those days.
Those days were good. Yeah, we had a good time.
You got me in tears, Danny. I just, oh my God. We were alive. We were growing, creative, inventive, and...
Do something creative.
One of the things I always wanted to do, and I never had a chance to do it, was I was going to do the class the next year. I wanted Stoddard Malarkey to come in. I was going to go into the class because I looked young enough then, and I wanted to be there as a student. And I wanted Stoddard to come into the room and say to the class, "The instructor is in here someplace. And your job this year will be to keep a journal about your interviews with every person in this classroom to figure out who it is." And I'm such a good liar, I knew I could get by with this for a long time. But I never got a chance to do that. And I had Stoddard had actually agreed to do this.
Wow, he's an unusual department head.
Now, have you heard about Stoddard Malarkey?
Is he still? Oh, yeah.
Well,
I took all of Larry's classes.
Did you hear how he got here?
No.
Stoddard Malarkey was a student at Reed College, which was is a prestigious school in Portland. Stoddard thought it would be neat one day to moon the administration building at Reed College.
Okay, got the drift of it.
And one of the problems with that was that it was a coupe, a small car. And so anything sticking out of a window is going to look quite large. The other problem with that was that a potential benefactor for Reed College was visiting the president that day, a guy who was prepared to leave millions on the table and didn't because of this event. Stoddard was ejected from Reed College. He lost his scholarship, came to the University of Oregon, and never left.
He became professor.
Before that, he had been a Golden Gloves
Yeah, he was
boxer, and he became a national
yeah.
champ, Golden Gloves.
A nice, very nice man.
Oh yeah.
Was he a Chaucer? Was he Chaucer?
I'm sorry?
Was his study Chaucer?
Chaucer, I believe, yes, yeah.
Of all things, yeah.
And
Yeah.
West Ham.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get to,
Yeah. Had a nice sense of humor.
yeah, well, yeah.
I guess we're doi, pow. In Hawaii, they'd say pow. In Eskimo country, they'd say doi. Done.
Oh, we have to pick up his phone.
Actually, I think we're just getting screwed.
Yeah, we're